Hey everyone, it's Vanessa. I'm here to do my next wrap up for the last 4 things that I read, and there's also a DNF in here. The first thing that I'll talk about is a poetry collection, Pansy by Andrea Gibson. This I've seen on Booktube, and I have been trying to get more into poetry lately, trying to figure out what exactly it is that I like in poems, what kind of styles I'm into, so I decided to pick this one up. There were a lot of things in here that I really enjoyed, and there were other things that I was not that crazy about reading. There's a wide variety of poems in here actually, and that might be a great thing for you if you're starting out, like it was for me. Now I kind of know I don't really care for poems about love or relationships, and that I'm more into political poems and poems about kind of how we identify, how we see ourselves in the world. So for example, one that is great is A Letter to White Queers, A Letter to Myself, and that's kind of about white privilege, talking about how she doesn't remember where she was when a lot of black men were murdered. It's kind of like, what does that say about her, where like some lives are more important to her than others. So it's like her calling out herself and realizing that she needs to be more mindful of other people who are not like her, who don't share her experience. One that is called 7/13/2013 journal entry, which is about George Zimmerman being found not guilty. It's the kind of stuff that hits you because you remember where you were when you heard that verdict. Kind of everything that she says, she's just kind of speaking truth to power, and that's what I liked most about these poems, is when she was looking at something that we have all seen and found the correct words, put them together, and gave it to us like, yes, this is exactly how I feel. Another great one that's kind of on those lines but is not looking into race is one called To the Men Catcalling My Girlfriend While I'm Walking Beside Her. It's awesome. You read it and you feel so empowered by the words that she's saying. Says, yes, I know it's low to call even assholes names, but any feminist who has ever taken the high road will tell you the high road gets backed up. And sometimes we need to take a detour straight through the belly of uncensored rage. One that doesn't have anything to do with feminism and topics of white privilege and race that I really enjoyed is called Panic Button Collector. It starts like this. I get online 30 times a day for the sole purpose of making sure I have not accidentally posted a nude photo. I reread my emails 14 times before pressing send to ensure I have not written something in the email that could convict me of a crime. So they're all about kind of like having these anxieties, and this whole poem really, I felt like it spoke more to me than a lot of the other poems that she had on there. I was also listening to some of these on YouTube, which is a great idea too. Overall, I did enjoy this, so I would recommend this if you're interested, especially if you're trying to still figure out what it is you're looking for like I am. Now I kind of know a little bit more about myself after finishing this poetry collection. The next thing that I read was actually Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. Finally, this book is a debut novel that follows 2 half-sisters, their lineages after they've been separated. One gets sold into slavery and one ends up marrying a white slaver. Just the idea of it is going to remain in my mind for a long time. It will leave an impression on me. It was extremely ambitious. I thought that the author really cared about the characters, paid so much attention to them, and through them telling the story of slavery, telling the story of being black in America, telling the story of what it's like to remain all those generations in Africa, in the villages that they were living in. Regardless of where you are, all these systems of oppression still exist. I definitely remember it with high opinions, but I don't think that over time the characters that I read about are going to leave that much of an impression on me. There's so many characters that we only get to be with them for 20 to 30 pages. I understand that that's the whole point, for you to see kind of how the generations develop over time, but I'm a person that really cares about characters. As more time kept going on, it just sort of felt like she was giving herself this assignment of, okay, now we are dealing with the post-bellum South, and now we are dealing with city life in the 70s. After a while, I was kind of like, it fit this very predictable pattern. It remained important to me to read these stories, but it did not remain as gripping for me to continue reading these stories. So when I will think of Homegoing in a year or two, I will remember it as a really important and different read, but I don't know if I'll really remember the actual stories and the actual characters inside of the book. The next thing that I finished was Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice, and this is by Philip Hoose. This looks into the life of Claudette Colvin growing up in Montgomery, Alabama, and when she was 15, 2015, she did not give up her seat on the bus so a white woman could sit in her seat, and she was arrested for it. So she was kind of a force that led to some of the later boycotts and some of the later action towards the desegregation of bus lines. I think this was really well told. The way that it's set up, it's her telling her personal story, so it's a first-person perspective, and then it's combined with Philip Hoose's narration of the events that were going on to kind of tie everything together that she was talking about and provided context. So I really enjoyed the way that that was set up because I got to hear from Claudette Colvin herself, and then I also got to hear from Philip Hoose, who did marvelous research. For a children's book, 1/6 of the book is references, notes, and places to go to learn more. It's heartening to see someone who cares enough about this topic that they are really researching it for you to provide the most full perspective. I also really enjoyed in this that there were a lot of pictures, which is great for children, but also great for me because you get to see all of the people that you're learning about through the pictures. There's also some really great inserts which go into kind of background information or more historical context of something specific that they're talking about in the text. So it was really well organized, well researched, and just riveting in general because this is a story that we're not really taught in our history classes. And I think it's even more important that while you're reading this, you realize even she wasn't the first to not get up from her seat on a bus. It's always been something that has been resisted. It's great that this book made me see how it wasn't just, hey, Rosa Parks decided to do this. It was lots of people before her, and then they chose Rosa Parks to prove a point. A lot of the things that I really enjoyed in this is looking at all those intricacies because they are things that I know about but haven't really learned about before. So learning about all the people involved, Claudette Colvin was surrounded by Martin Luther King Jr., she was surrounded by Rosa Parks, she was surrounded by all of these people because she was there in Montgomery. It was fascinating for me to learn that she worked with Rosa Parks, she was part of the NAACP chapter, like their youth part of the chapter. It wasn't just like they stole her idea. And I also found it really fantastic to learn about her lawyer. His name is Fred Gray, and that's him right there. He was 24 when he represented Claudette. I'm turning 24 in less than a month, and it's just, it's amazing to me that he was only 24 when he did this. I found it really interesting to learn about kind of the reasonings for not using Claudette Colvin to go to like the Supreme Court or something with her case. A lot of it was because she was a teenager, and a lot of it was because she was painted as like a very emotional person, and kind of like this disconnect, this miscommunication between the leadership and Claudette Colvin. I'm not necessarily including Claudette, even though she was a catalyst to a lot of that. Another thing that I found really interesting was actually in an insert, and I had never heard about this story before, but there was a white librarian in Montgomery by the name of Juliet Morgan who wrote a letter to the editor at their newspaper. She supported the boycott and she supported integration. She got death threats immediately. Somebody hurled stones at her picture window and rang the doorbell again and again and again in the middle of the night. It says she lost many friends, and about a year after the letter was published in the Montgomery Advertiser, their newspaper, she took her own life. I'd never heard about this woman before, and so I looked her up, and she was very involved with voicing her support for integration in Montgomery. That just spoke to me because she is a librarian, and I'm studying to be a librarian, and the principles of librarians you can see so well in her support. So it was really inspirational to read this. It was really informative and educational. I just loved learning about Claudette herself. This, I can say happily, was my first 5-star read of the year. Fantastic. If you know a child in your life, this would be great for them, and if you like this kind of history, this is also great too. It's only 130 pages, it has photographs, it has great historical background in the inserts, and it's really well researched, so I would definitely recommend it. And finally, the last thing that I read was In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. This follows a girl's escape from North Korea. She ends up going to China where she and her mother are trafficked. Then she escapes to Mongolia, and then from Mongolia travels to South Korea as a refugee. I didn't know much about defectors before I got into this, as well as I didn't really know much about living in North Korea. So this really opened up my eyes to what that might be like, and facing starvation and facing living in an area with no electricity, having to do it all on your own, being left by your mother and father as they're trying to find opportunities for you in a system that's not working for anybody except the dictator in charge. I found that also really interesting to learn about what it's like for these refugees to get out and to defect to go to another country, and the very different ways they're treated, especially like comparing China to South Korea, understanding kind of the brainwashing that goes on, how difficult it must be for a child like that to understand like what's right from wrong, especially when you come from a background when things are only black and white, there's no gray. I think a lot of the story, while it is emotional though, is told very matter-of-factly, and it doesn't use kind of the emotion to try to sway you one way or another. It's the stories that sway you. For me, it was just a learning experience, learning about this woman's struggle, these situations that she is placed in, and how every step of the way she was like ready to commit suicide. She was ready for it to just all be over. But somehow she came up from all of that. I think it's an important read in that you are placed in the shoes of somebody who has gone through something that I've never gone through, and it's definitely made me more aware of what being in North Korea might be like. And last but not least, the DNF that I said I would talk about for a second. That is Solanin. I talked about this in a couple of videos past, and I got 100 pages in and was really into it, and then I read 100 more pages, and then I realized I wasn't into it. It seemed very boring to me, very bland, and the story wasn't really going anywhere, even though I was like halfway through. And there's just nothing here for me right now, so I'm gonna put it down, and maybe something else by Inio Asano might be better for me. That's all I have for you. Thanks so much for watching my video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye.